All right, so I think we're all set to start. We do have a quorum, thanks to those who are here. So I'll convene our regular meeting of the Burlington Planning Commission for Wednesday, May 25th, 2022. Usually we meet on Tuesdays, but today we meet on Wednesday. First item on our agenda is the agenda, and I do have one change, and we can make it item 6.5. It's action on our executive session from our last meeting, which is the recommendation for the reappointment of the director of the department. So we'll have that be item 6.5. Any other changes?
Andy, if you would like, at the last meeting, you had also requested that I share the presentation about the department's budget with the full commission that I gave to you at the executive session.
Yes.
If you'd like, we could make that be a time permitting item. So I could do it towards the end if there's still time.
Sure, that'd be great.
Okay, so we can make that 6.5.2.
Yes.
Okay.
Time permitting. That sounds good. Anything else? All right, then we have our agenda as amended. Item 2 is a public forum. This is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to the commission on pretty much any item that you would like to. We do have a couple agenda items, and if you are talking on one of those and you want to wait till that, well, you could do that as well. But do we have anybody for the public forum?
We do. We have Sharon Busher first here to speak, and we have at least one more person.
Okay, good. Oh, Sharon, welcome.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to speak at the Trinity rezoning item, but I did read in the city council packet that Bryn was going to be stepping down, and I really appreciated her perspective and her participation, and I understood the communication, and I'm just sad that her voice won't be part of the commission anymore. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as one resident, I really value you, and thank you so much. So that's what I wanted to say. And I just want to be clear, I did send a communication, but it was late Monday night. And so it wasn't initially in your packet. I hope you all got a chance to look at it. And in my normal fashion, it was very wordy, and I apologize for that. But I really hope that I bolded the fact that I understood your purview really is only the rezoning of Trinity, but I thought the other issues were relevant, and I needed to touch on them to really lay the foundation for some of the rationale from Ward 1 and some of the neighbors. So anyways, I hope you had a chance to look at it, and I look forward to hearing from UVM and then maybe having a chance to ask some additional questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. And Charles, you said we have somebody else?
Yes, we've got Barbara Hedrick. You're now able to speak.
Welcome, Barbara.
Hi, I did not plan on speaking tonight. I'm just observing, but I did send in comments, so I hope everybody read those. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Barbara. Charles, do we have anybody else?
We've got a few folks, not exactly sure who's from the public. We've got a Joe and a Jack Lyons. Are you here to speak, Joe?
I'm not here to speak right now, no.
Okay, great.
So I'll just jump in here really quick to let the commission know. You do have a couple of folks from UVM. So Joe that was just speaking is Joe Spidell. And we also have Lisa Kingsbury from the campus planning office. So if there are any questions that are specific that the institution should really help us answer, they are here. And I'm sure I'm putting them on the spot a little bit. I'm sure they'd be willing to help answer questions. You do have an additional neighbor, Martha Lang, here, and Jack Lyons, who is from VT Digger, is also here. So that's who you have in attendance tonight with you.
Okay, great. So do we have anybody else who wants to speak during public forum? It doesn't sound like it. All right, then we'll close the public forum and go to the chair's report. And I'll just say this is the first time, Britton, that I'm hearing that you're stepping down. Sorry to see that. You've been a great member of our commission, so you will be missed.
Thank you. I was going to say something this evening. My evening meeting schedule is changing and I won't be able to make Tuesday night meetings anymore.
Oh.
I'm sorry to go though.
Okay, that's understandable, but as I said, you really will be very missed on this. You bring in a great voice to our commission and to the community, so. Thanks
Yeah,
for
likewise.
thanks
Thank
for your
you, Bryn.
service.
Yeah, thank you. And where else do you get the chance to talk about zoning at night?
Nowhere. It's going to be missed in my life. I can tell you that.
You'll have to rope some of your parents into talking with you about zoning when you have your night
I'll
meeting.
try.
Okay, so with that, I'll close the chair's report and go on to the director's report. Megan.
I'll keep my report tonight pretty brief, especially in order to save some time to potentially talk about the budget presentation. The main thing I wanted to share tonight is actually a welcome. You might have noticed an unfamiliar face here tonight. Sarah Morgan is our brand new planner. She started with us on May 11th, so it's been exactly 2 weeks that she's been working for us. And we wanted to bring her here tonight just to give her an opportunity to introduce herself to all of you. You are going to be seeing some of Sarah's work as recently or as soon as your next meeting. She's jumped right in and has been helping many of us on our team with lots of projects that we had in the works already. And we're really grateful and happy to have her in this brand new role that we have in our department. So Sarah, is there anything you'd like to say to add to that?
It's so great to be here with everyone. Like Megan said, I'm Sarah. I'm excited to be up in Burlington. So as soon as mid-June, really looking forward to being up there with the team, and I've really enjoyed the work that I've gotten to do so far. Just for context, I am moving up after about a decade of being in the Ohio Valley, working in mainly environmental justice, GIS related projects and climate resiliency planning. So excited to branch out into Burlington and city planning in general.
Great. Well, we're really happy to have you be joining us. We've heard lots of good things about you. So, and you said you'll be here in Burlington mid-June?
Yep.
Good.
I believe first in-person day, May 20th, or June 20th, sorry.
Great. We look forward to that.
Yes, we do as well. And Charles also has finally been able to secure housing and will be arriving in Burlington right after Memorial Day. So we're really glad to get our whole team up here pretty soon. And hopefully at some point this summer, you all can meet them in person as well. So
Good. Well, one of the, there are a lot of downsides of having to meet remotely like this. But one of the pluses is we have no idea where people are. So as far as we could tell, we're all here together on this. So
yeah,
it doesn't feel like you're so far away.
It has been one of the silver linings, I have to admit. Hiring during this time has been really difficult for a lot of reasons. And as both Charles and Sarah have experienced, the housing work that we're talking about every day is a very real issue for a lot of people. And so it's been nice to have the ability for them both to start virtually as they've been working to come here. So
Great. Well, thank you. We'll move on to item 5, which is the proposed CDO amendment for public art. Who's taking this one? Is this yours, Scott?
Andy, I'll introduce this item, and Scott was part of the ordinance committee deliberation on this, so he's able to probably answer some questions as well. So this item, this proposed zoning amendment, is really to address a change that was part of the form code. The introduction of the form code removed, and I'm sorry, my toddler is just about to go to bed, so you might hear him in the background. So with the adoption of the form code, all language regulating public art in the development ordinance was removed. And so there has been no language regulating public art. And early in March, a member of the Design Review Board and a member of the public came forward with a concern about the lack of regulations regarding public art. And so the ordinance committee took this item up, and over a course of a couple meetings, did help craft some language to address public art. Prior to this, prior to the removal of public arts mentioned in the CDO, public art was governed in a few ways. It did provide some bonus height in exchange for public art. It permitted public art as an encroachment in the required waterfront setback and provided standards and guidance on public art funding, location, and maintenance. And so ultimately what the ordinance committee has proposed is to amend the ordinance to exempt public art from the requirements to obtain a zoning permit, but did provide 6 standards related to some themes, including safety, appropriateness, historic resources, urban design, accessibility, and compliance with local and state laws. And so in summary, this would just return some regulating language to the CDO regarding public art. That's the summary. Happy to take any questions. And like I said, Scott was part of the ordinance committee discussion on this, so he's also able to answer any questions you might have.
The only one thing that I'll just add is that these regulations are intended to help also facilitate public art. We wanted to make sure that, public art is a big part of the city's culture and public realm. And so we wanted to make sure that the form code was not inadvertently precluding it somehow. So these standards are really to help kind of provide the basic foundation and enable it.
Thanks, Megan.
Scott or anyone else? Anyone from the ordinance committee want to weigh in on this? So could someone just go through what the changes are? You could do briefly, but just to highlight what the changes are.
Sure. So first of all, the proposed amendment does provide a new definition for public art. And, in the definition, it sort of tries to cover all the sort of types of public art that might exist: murals, sculpture, carvings, any sort of public art. It's meant to be very broad in defining public art. And so it also in section 3.1.2, zoning permit requirements, does propose to exempt public art provided that sort of the following conditions are met. First of all public art would have to meet applicable building codes for wind load, structural stability, mounting, and anchoring, obviously to promote public health and safety. Also provide some language about appropriateness, making sure that any public art that is constructed and implemented is not, offensive or does not, incite violence or hate of any kind. It also provides some guidance and some regulations on public art that is attached to or adjacent to historic preservation and historic resources. So any public art that is attached to a historic building or landscape would need to be constructed in a way that does not endanger that resource. Within the form districts, it does not cause or increase any non-conformity with urban design standards, including things like facade voids, transparency, or glazing. Accessibility is the 5th item. So public art should not infringe on the accessibility of any building or landscape. And finally, all city bylaws and state laws, ordinances should be respected by any public art that is proposed or constructed. So that's the summary of the changes. And again, like Megan said, this is meant to regulate it, but also to facilitate public art. If you read through the memo, you'll see that there's actually quite a bit of mention of public art in Plan BTV. Very much acknowledge that art is an integral component of Burlington's character and identity. And so, again, these standards are really meant to protect that character and to further facilitate public art.
Good. Any questions? Michael?
Michael, I think
can't
you're
hear
muted
you.
or we can't hear you.
I think you may need to unmute your phone instead of your computer.
You could write it on a.
You
a
could also
whiteboard.
chat it to us if you
Yeah.
would like.
Yeah, Michael, yeah. I was gonna say.
Or sign language. if there's sign language.
While you're doing that, let's go to Alex, because I saw that you wanted to speak too. Alex?
Not I.
Okay.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, you'll just have to bear with the background noise. Just a point of clarification, is a building permit required for public art? So regarding the ADA accessible aspects of what's described in the zoning, sort of what's the governance on that?
I think the accessibility was about public art not precluding accessibility. So not putting a sculpture in the middle of a walkway. It sounds obvious, but it came up during discussion and was decided to be codified. It doesn't need a building permit. It depends what it is, right? If it's a mural, it doesn't. If it's something
Okay, 'cause
structural, it does.
Okay, yeah, I was just getting into sort of the loading and the dimensional aspects that are described, what sort of governs that itself. So I guess if it can or it cannot.
Right.
Okay. And then the other thing was on B, not that I would want public art to violate these in any way, but and this may be just a general course of the ordinance committee, but has council from the city reviewed this, and is it consistent with what's allowed to be restricted?
I think Attorney Sturdivant had seen this. I won't say that she gave us an explicit thumbs up or thumbs down. We can certainly do that before it moves forward. I know during discussion, there's a theme of we're not the first ones to do this. There has to be general language out there that we can refer to, and I think this tries to get there.
And I think we do have something about this in our sign regulations potentially that we could just cross-reference this too. But for the commissioners who aren't familiar, what Michael is referring to is, that speech is regulated, is federally regulated, and we can't pass, especially within the context of sign regulations, we can't pass laws that would in any way limit people's free speech. And so I think that is something that we could just double check with the city attorney's office, Michael, to make sure that this is all above board.
I was going to ask sort of the same question on B, just making sure that this has gone through the city attorney's office to make sure it's acceptable. But then also just a more general question, like on specific installation shall not be insulting, for example. Who would be the ones to decide whether or not something is insulting? Is it staff? Is it DRB? How is that? Someone decides something's insulting and brings a complaint. How does that happen?
It's a very good question, Andy. I'm not sure what the answer is. I mean, who would decide whether it's insulting? I don't know.
Well, and I think that
My
that's
Delta building inspector would.
because this is also under the section of the ordinance that talks about when a zoning permit is not required, I think that this interpretation of insulting might happen more on a complaint basis, Andy, to kind of speak to your question.
Okay.
Scott, have you, from an enforcement perspective, have you all dealt with issues of complaints about content of art or signs? And how did you deal with that?
Fortunately, we haven't.
Because, I mean, I could just imagine that, whether you want to call it public art or just art on private property, probably, art is a form, a significant form of speech. And I could just imagine, a really heightened protection of speech on private property. So probably, I mean, I think the whole concept of what you have here works really well. And I'm glad we picked up on the fact that this kind of got lost in the shuffle. But I think, as we move this process along, we may, we'll see where people want to go, but we may be moving this to a public hearing tonight. But I think we should just look at this issue a little bit deeper in anticipation of some concerns coming up about that.
Andy, you wouldn't happen to be referring to one famous statue in Jeffersonville, would you?
No, actually not. Now I'm curious.
Okay, I thought maybe you had a famous Vermont example in mind that you were thinking of about.
That was in Westford, Megan.
Oh, it's in Westford. Sorry.
Westford,
Westford.
different
Apologies.
digit.
What is it?
I'm from Westford.
Um,
It's like this, but with a different finger.
Right.
Aha, okay.
It's big, made of wood.
it was specifically constructed by someone who was denied a permit by the planning commission.
Okay.
Yep.
So staff's recommendation on this one was ask questions and provide feedback on the draft amendment. Do we have any more feedback on the draft amendment? And if we're ready to approve a warning for this for a public hearing. So what would folks like to do? Do you want to wait and see what comes back to us on some of these questions, or should we just move forward on a public hearing?
I think we should just move forward on a public hearing. So motion
Then-
to move this forward for a public hearing with the attached. report.
But it will be with the current version. I would feel more comfortable if we just had part B looked at a little bit more, unless it's acceptable to move it forward with amendments or changes. Unless someone's screaming for this, it seems like this all occurred out of reaction to an existing structure that's probably not going anywhere.
Well, we can make changes after a public hearing. So
Okay.
we're not locked in. And I do think this section will probably need that one particular section will probably need some changes, but we can move forward with the public hearing if people so choose. And so we have the motion we'll just go through the process. Is there a second for it?
Second.
Seconded by Alex. Discussion, and we've had one piece of discussion, which is a thought that we should wait. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, or if that
I
was your,
can respond to the waiting. I think if we move forward and there's amendments, if people show up to the meeting and they have lots of comments about it, we can always have another public forum. It's just nice to move things along.
And just to reiterate what Andy said, we are able to make changes during or after a public forum if there are any issues that the Planning Commission wants to address based on either things that you heard or additional considerations that staff brings to you. So I think there's not a problem if you'd like to move it forward, and we can always address it if we need to.
any other discussion? I'm fine moving it forward with the public hearing. I also think it'll be interesting to hear if we have any other comments from members of the public on this. And then we could, address everything. Sometimes we only get comments at a public hearing. So unless there's any further discussion, all those in favor of the motion, say aye or raise your hand. All right. Any opposed? Then that's unanimous, it looks like, and so that will move forward to the public hearing. And again, it'll be good to get more feedback on, particularly on that one item. So we'll move on to item 6, which is proposed CDO amendment, UVM Trinity campus zoning.
All right, I've got this one and I'm going to share my screen and go through a quick presentation, maybe not so quick, but go through a presentation that will help provide some context to the discussion about the request to consider the zoning for Trinity campus. Hopefully everybody can see my slides here. Oh, you know what? Are you seeing a full slide or are you seeing the presenter panel?
I think we're seeing the full slide of December Housing Action Plan.
Okay, great, perfect. Sometimes this doesn't work properly. All right, so we've talked about this December Housing Action Plan a couple of times in the last several meetings of the Planning Commission. As you know, there are a number of items within this Housing Action Plan that are within the Planning Commission's purview. We've talked a lot about some of the other initiatives that are aimed at addressing homelessness within Burlington and the allocation of resources and funding to help address that issue. We heard a kind of brief overview of the 3 items that have been on the Planning Commission's to-do list for a while that were also included in this plan. These 3 kind of major zoning considerations. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about the issue of the Trinity campus zoning for UVM's campus and potential changes that we could introduce to the Trinity campus to help facilitate greater student housing on the campus. As you know, and we've talked about these briefly in the past, there are 2 other zoning amendments that you'll see at your meetings in the near future. One is the South End Enterprise District zoning consideration. You talked about this last summer, and since then, we've been working at a staff level with a group of stakeholders to try to work through some of the specific detailed questions about how to actually bring you a proposal for a zoning change in the South End that would support some level of residential use and also help to implement Plan BTV's concept of an innovation district in a portion of the South End. So that's something that Charles has been doing a lot of work on since he started. We presented to the Ward 5 NPA meeting last week at a very high level some of the key aspects of what this innovation district could include, which are things that the Planning Commission has heard before. And we're currently working to set up both an online public engagement process as well as public meetings that will happen towards the end of June. So we'll make sure to share those with the Planning Commission and invite you for your participation in those as well. And the purpose of that would be to share a more detailed overview of what a South End Innovation zoning amendment could look like. We're also working in the background on gearing up for more intense work on a missing middle project, missing middle zoning project that will look for opportunities to expand small kind of neighborhood scale housing opportunities citywide. We did receive a grant from the state of Vermont to help support this work, and AARP Vermont is going to work with us as a close partner. So we have been doing some of the preliminary work to evaluate our existing zoning ordinance and start to develop an engagement plan for that process. So we can provide more of an update for you on that also later this summer. But tonight we're going to dig into the Trinity campus discussion. Wanted to start with just talking about, again, the relationship of these issues to our broader city plans. This is a screenshot actually of our online Plan BTV land use plan that talks about this area of the city around Trinity campus. You can see here on the map, this yellow shape indicates the area of the Trinity campus that's within our Trinity campus overlay zone. This area of the city is discussed in Plan BTD as an area that we want to facilitate growth for the institutions, as well as the relationship to the Colchester Avenue corridor, which is one of the major thoroughfares you might remember in our land use plan, which are also intended to help facilitate more intensive development activities along the major thoroughfares that are served by transit in the city. So this campus is located directly within and along two of those major growth areas that are identified in our future land use plan. As we've been discussing a potential zoning amendment for Trinity campus, there are many related planning objectives and community objectives that we share with the institutions. And there are some that are specific to the city, there are some that are specific to UVM, but there are many of the goals for this potential rezoning that we share. In particular, I think we share the goal to facilitate the greatest number of student beds on that campus that could be reasonably achieved or reasonably developed in a responsible way. There's also been a discussion for a long time about the role of the Trinity campus and this idea of Trinity campus helping to provide a mix of uses that can also provide support and amenities to the nearby neighborhood. This is an idea that was embodied in the creation of the Trinity campus overlay back in 2001 when it was initially developed. And ultimately, as we fast forward to today, I think this goal also can help us think about how infill development on the campus can promote a vibrant residential community that could be attractive to a wide range of students at all kind of ages and grade levels in the institution setting. We also share the goals of helping to re-envision what the campus could look like and how buildings and open spaces on the campus could be oriented to help activate this part of campus more, both for campus residents as well as for the community, and to help provide greater synergy with the city's planned improvements along Colchester Avenue. I think some of you may know that back in the fall, the City Council approved a concept plan to re-envision how the bike lanes and sidewalks and parking work along Colchester Avenue to make it a more accessible corridor for people who are not driving. And then we also share the goals of kind of minimizing parking development on the campus and really facilitating a campus environment that emphasizes more productive uses and helps facilitate walking and biking in this part of the city. You also received a presentation from UVM back in February that included some additional requests related to some of their goals, which are to specifically build new undergraduate residence halls and graduate apartments, to implement and upgrade some of their existing residence halls that are on the Trinity campus and expand the existing dining services, and also just to enhance the overall atmosphere of campus. So when we think about when we zoom in on what the specific zoning regulations are for the Trinity campus, I think it's important to talk first about these institutional core campus overlays. There are 5 core campus overlays that apply to portions of the the institutional zoning district in the city. 3 of them apply to areas of UVM's campus. 1 of them applies to the UVM Medical Center campus, and the other applies to Champlain College's academic and residential campuses. Each of these overlays applies different standards based on the area of the city that they apply to, and really the purpose within the context of institutional development that they're trying to help facilitate. So this means that the setbacks allowed, height, density, lot coverage, all vary within these institutional overlays based on the needs of that specific part of campus. And really they range from trying to concentrate the most intensive development for particularly UVM and the medical center within the core campus areas between Colchester and Main Street, and also help provide some lower intensity development and transitional areas within the adjacent neighborhoods. So a significant portion of the Trinity campus is actually located within the Trinity campus overlay zone. As I mentioned before, this overlay zone was created in 2001 following the closure of Trinity College. And the goal at the time of creating this was really to help provide for some future reuse of the campus that would help serve the neighborhood and the community with mixed uses, as well as to support potential future collegiate use if there were another institution that were interested in the campus. Ultimately, UVM acquired the campus in 2003. And while there have been some minor improvements to this overlay zone since it was created, it largely maintains the same standards that were put in place when it was initially created 20 years ago. So what are those standards? This is a summary of what is allowed within the Trinity Campus Overlay District. To start over on the right, you can see that this is an excerpt of UVM's campus map. And when we refer to the Trinity campus, we are generally referring to this area of UVM that is just to the north of Colchester Avenue, between Nash Place and Fletcher Place. So this is the Trinity campus here. The Trinity campus overlay zone only applies to the kind of central portion of that campus that you see outlined in yellow. Currently, the standards for this district, unlike some of the other overlay zones in the city, the standards for this district closely follow the underlying institutional zoning district, which means that it has a much lower building height allowance, a lower lot coverage allowance. It does maintain density limits and some kind of limits on uses that are not present in other overlay zones within the institutional district. This district also has a special setback from Colchester Avenue, which limits any development of either buildings or parking within 115 feet of Colchester Avenue. So you can see here that buildings that are within that setback are really limited to, small ancillary buildings of no bigger than 200 square feet. The other thing that is unique about Trinity campus, the Trinity campus overlay, is that it also sets unique thresholds for the permitting process for developments on this part of campus. In other parts of the city, the major impact thresholds are really consistent with whatever the underlying zoning district is. In this case, the institutional zone requires major impact review by the Development Review Board for developments around 40,000 square feet of gross area. And within the Trinity campus overlay zone, that's reduced to developments of 15,000 square feet or more. So these are some of the things that are unique about the Trinity campus overlay. Alex, I saw that you had come off mute a minute ago. Did you have a question or?
Wrong button.
Okay, great. At your meeting in February, you heard a presentation from Richard Kate from UVM about the work that the institution has been doing to evaluate how they might reimagine the Trinity campus, and specifically where and how they might try to facilitate some new campus housing within this part of campus. So these images here, the site plan and these concept images that kind of illustrate what they're thinking about in terms of where new buildings might be best situated on the Trinity campus. Of course, one of the things that you heard about that planning process is that the current zoning would not enable that development to happen. And so you heard specifically 3 requests from UVM about this overlay zone. The first was to consider a different height limit for this campus. The UVM requested the consideration of a 45-foot height limit within that setback from Colchester Avenue, and an 80-foot height limit beyond it to the north. So essentially from Mann Hall to the north. They requested an increase of lot coverage to 60%, which is consistent with other overlay zones that we see on campus. And also requested some changes to that setback on Colchester Avenue. So instead of buildings needing to be 115 feet from the street, to consider those shorter buildings to be within 25 feet of Colchester Avenue. And to really, in kind of as part of that, allow for some of the campus's primary buildings to be within that 115 feet, rather than just limiting it to 200 square foot, really small buildings. So this is an image also from Richard Kate from his presentation, just outlining these questions. So we're interested tonight in hearing, feedback from the commission about these specific requests. And before we get into that, we do have a couple other considerations that, from a staff perspective, we wanted to also get the commission's feedback on tonight. There are two zoning amendments that you also have moved forward for a public hearing that do have a relationship to the question about Trinity Campus that we just wanted to share a quick reminder on. The first is the pending amendment related to steep slopes in the city. This is something that Scott and the ordinance committee worked on, but really trying to identify steep slopes in the city and areas around them near the top of slope, and looking at opportunities for development to actually conduct geotechnical analyses to help ensure the suitability of those slopes for future development. Because Trinity Campus is located at the top of the ravine, the back portion of the campus that you can see here along this red line, this is the back 5 dorms. You've got Mann Hall here. This back portion of the campus is really surrounded by these steep slopes and this proposed buffer area, which really kind of points to the goal that we would hope would be one of the outcomes of this amendment if it passes, which is for development to kind of move away from slopes and to consider their impact, any potential impact on slopes. But you can also see here on this image, this yellow line is the 115-foot setback from Colchester Avenue, which really starts to kind of limit and compress the area within Trinity Campus that could be area for new development to occur to a much smaller portion of campus. The other amendment that you have warned for a public hearing that's pending is the package of amendments that originated at the City Council related to parking. And as you know, part of that discussion was about what the requirements are for the joint institutional parking management plan process. And really just want to reiterate the point here that, as you know, some more specific requirements for what type of information is provided in that parking management plan was added, as well as making it more explicit that that plan is really a prerequisite to obtaining a zoning permit or a certificate of occupancy. So those are two other moving parts that are related to this process. But as we look specifically at the requirements of Trinity Campus and some of those shared goals that I mentioned at the beginning, some questions come up about other standards within the Trinity Overlay District. One of the things that differentiates the Trinity Campus from other overlay zones in our ordinance is that the Trinity overlay does not, the other overlay zoning districts do not apply a density limit to the areas of campus that are within them. And the purpose of that is really to try to help facilitate and implement growth of the institutions within their campus areas, to try to help facilitate that. So one of the questions for all of you to, we want to hear your feedback on is, should there be a density limit on the Trinity campus? Currently, it has a limit of 20 units per acre. And the question is, should this be modified or removed from the Trinity campus overlay to help facilitate that kind of maximum number of student beds on the campus? There are also a limited range of non-residential uses that can be added to the Trinity campus unless they're in existing buildings. So this is a little bit of a quirk of the Trinity overlay zone in that we want, and the purpose says that we want to help facilitate mixed uses and in particular, some mixed uses that can support the nearby neighborhoods. But we require them to go through a conditional use process if they're in a new building, and really have tried to limit them to being within existing buildings. So as we think about the opportunity for new construction on Trinity campus, a question is, should these mix of uses be allowed within new buildings as well and not be subject to the conditional use review process? These are things like cafes and laundromats and kind of small commercial uses. And then another question is just about that threshold I mentioned for when projects have to go to major impact review. Should there be a different and lower threshold for this overlay zone, or is it more appropriate for developments on this campus to follow standards that are used in other mixed use areas of the city? So I'm going to stop there, and I want to give a chance for you all to ask questions and share any reactions. There is one other piece that we want to talk through, but I think I've already given you a lot to digest to start with, so we'll start there.
So thank you, Megan. I also at the public forum had told people they could speak. If they have comments to this, they could speak during this. Would now be a good time to hear from the public if anybody wants to speak on this?
Sure, Andy, if you'd like, we could do that, or if the commission wants to ask any questions first, it's up to you.
I think it might, well, unless the commission feels otherwise, I think this might be a good time. That way, if somebody does ask any questions or make any comments that we want to get answered, we could follow up on that as well. So I think this might be a good time to hear from the public if anybody wants to speak. Obviously, they don't have to. But.
Sure, Andy, I'll open the floor up to Sharon again. I believe she said she would like to speak at this item. Sharon, you've got the mic if you'd like to speak.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation, Megan. I think it was very helpful to go through that history. Before this Trinity campus was purchased by UVM, the plan was that this was actually going to be sort of a neighborhood activity center with cafes and small business uses and potentially some residential component. It was exciting, and then it imploded. So the setbacks and the overlay were really geared to that concept, that vision, and that engagement with the community. And so I think that you need to understand why that was created. It wasn't created because UVM owned it. It was created for a different purpose. So that's number one. Number two is that I appreciate the steep slope and how that means that the rear of the property has limited, maybe has less potential, because there has not really been a defined setback, although I certainly hope there will be from the edge of the steep slope. But I do agree that we want to be safe. We want to be safe when we construct. We want to be safe for the people that inhabit that and for the people below. So I appreciate that comment. And although I'm not a planner, and I don't appreciate planning that is on top of me when I'm on the sidewalk. I feel claustrophobic. I feel like I'm in New York City, and I don't want Burlington to be New York City. I don't like that. I understand that's how planning wants to go, but I don't like it, and I don't think it's necessary. I think that setbacks give breathing space. In Ward 1, we have very little open space. Most of the open space is owned by the institutions. The hospital, which I negotiated that community garden and the sliding hill, I did an agreement with Joe McNeil to give Ward 1 some breathing space, and Trinity also offers us a little bit of breathing space. So I'm not enamored with having development 25 feet back from the sidewalk. And I want to draw your attention to Redstone Campus and South Prospect, where development is more in sync and more compatible with existing development and set further back. I'm not saying it has to remain at 115 feet. I agree that it can be closer, but I think 25 feet is too close, and my communication speaks to my thoughts on that. As far as surface parking, the chair of this commission was a city councilor and used to say, before we cover another blade of grass, we should build over parking lots. And I still agree with you, Chair Andy Montrell. I certainly do. And I think there are some surface parking areas that offer potential for development. My communication has to do with, yes, you want zoning in place, but I do believe that you also want to know what their master plan is. And I think we're deserving of knowing what their master plan would look like. And then just accommodate that. When I was on the ordinance committee for some of the overlays for UVM, and they actually said what they were thinking of, and we tried to work with them to make that happen, but it was set back from Ward 6, and we from the neighborhoods in Ward 6 to allow greater density and height, because you want to be respectful for the people in the small residential homes. I think that's what we're saying, is that this is a great place for development. This can accommodate some students. This can accommodate some grad students. I think that there are things that can be amended, but I want them to be thoughtful, and I don't want them just to happen and then let it fill in. We have very limited opportunities. Right now, this campus allows more review than most institutional projects. I need clarity on that, because UVM can do a lot of things without going through an in-depth review. So once you set the zoning in place, I am concerned of then the outcome is what the outcome will be. So I feel I want to see a master plan of some sort. And I think that then it's deserving of giving them the height and the density that they're looking for. Lot coverage increase doesn't scare me. Added height in the back doesn't scare me. Setback and the initial height of those first buildings are of great concern. And I want them to mirror the 35-foot structures that are surrounding it in a very cohesive neighborhood that is a perfect neighborhood with all sorts of people and little small businesses all thriving. And I welcome UVM into that neighborhood and the addition of students and grad students and maybe medical students. But I want it to be breathable. I'm going to stop there. I think once you have more detail, I would hope that I would have a chance, not tonight, but to comment specifically on some of the other things. But I want to thank Megan for the very good overview and a reminder of everything that is under your consideration. And thanks to the Planning Commission for listening to me.
Thank you, Sharon. Charles, do we have anybody else who wants to speak now? Any other members of the public? If there is, if you could, I don't know how you raise your hand, but do that so Charles could see. Otherwise, I'll bring it back to.
Barbara, or anybody else, if you would like to speak, there's a raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. If you would like to speak, just click that button and we'll unmute you.
Oh, Charles, you muted yourself.
Andy, it doesn't look like anybody
Okay.
would like to speak.
Okay, great. So I'll bring it back to the commission. Comments, thoughts? Megan asked a lot of questions in there. Emily?
Hi. A few people have approached me about this project, and one of the concerns that has been brought up that I'm not sure that we have any ability to address is that the project will create new housing for students, but that the university isn't actually going to increase the net number of housing units on campus, or that the density and current use of dorms on campus is already to the max with like triples and things like that. So that this isn't actually going to relieve any of the housing pressures in Burlington because it won't take up any new students. So or it's only going to take upperclassmen so anyways, I'm curious, do we have any mechanism to ensure that this is actually going to be an increase in housing to UVM over the long term and not just a transfer of location or relieving their current overdensity in the dorms? So I'm not sure if somebody on UVM is like, I think Joe was on the call. Maybe that could be addressed.
Yeah, or maybe Lisa, if
Lisa.
Charles could enable them and maybe they could answer if they'd like. Yeah, I mean, in terms of thinking specifically about what populations on campus are anticipated to be housed on Trinity campus, UVM really is the best to answer that question. I want to speak to one aspect of the zoning amendment that I think is maybe good historical context and also thinking about a tool that we have currently. But I know that back in the late 2000s, I think it was around 2009, the Planning Commission and some of our commissioners that aren't here tonight, but were still on the commission back then, were involved in this sort of joint process with the City Council to think about some of the other overlay districts. And I think that group was really searching for the opportunity for zoning to somehow, give some kind of benchmark for a percentage of the student body that should be housed on campus. And ultimately that led to an outside agreement. It was outside of the zoning ordinance that established this sort of working agreement between the city and UVM that had been in place for a long time. So ultimately having those metrics in zoning was, I don't know the history, either not determined to be legal or feasible, what the case was, but they were not incorporated. We do have housing replacement standards in our zoning ordinance, as well as specifically within each of these overlay zoning districts as well, that helps to at least ensure that the number of beds that are on campus are maintained. And that as these projects get implemented, they result in either the same number of beds or a net increase in beds. How that relates to changes in enrollment are a little bit different, but just wanted to speak to that aspect. And I don't know if Lisa or Joe wants to speak about the question about who's housed.
I can touch on that a little bit. So I will say, within our residential life system right now, we don't house any graduate students. So the graduate student housing would definitely be a net increase of people who are living in the outside community now that would be brought onto campus. As far as the undergraduate component of it, it does provide some wiggle room to withstand fluctuations in enrollment. Right now, we haven't had room for the last year or two to house any of our juniors and seniors within the residential life system. So this could provide some space for some of those students to come back to campus. It's not being planned currently specifically for upper class students. We have our housing is a little different than it was a few years ago. We do programmed housing. So students are mixed together. It's not a first year, second year building like it used to be. But it provides some room there for students to come back. And it also provides a little room so that we aren't, as you were saying, quite so dense in the beginning of the year when we have to have so many triples and things like that. It can do some de-densifying, and it also allows us some ability to make improvements to our other residence halls as well. It could do that in the future. As far as enrollment goes, we have been fortunate enough to be staying at the level that we've been and growing a little bit over the last couple of years. The demographics, we're not sure in the future. We know that the number of students in the Northeast is declining. The number of students that will be available. Now our enrollment people are certainly, and admissions people are certainly on top of that. They've been reaching out to other parts of the country, and we have brought in other people, but the number of high school students overall has been going down. In the future, it could provide for some more juniors, seniors to come and live on campus.
Emily, did you have any follow-up or any?
Yeah, I guess I'm interested to know if there's currently any discussions with the administration about an agreement that could solidify some of these concerns about then, it having a net impact to a number of students housed on campus.
Are you asking me or Lisa?
Yeah, I guess I am. It sounds to me like you said that in the past, the administration has used these types of projects in order to have some sort of commitment from the university to do X, Y, or Z. I think, in talking to community members, there's a real frustration that UVM has not stepped up to the plate in a big way to house students. And it seems to me like in many administrations have failed to, really get UVM to do that. So it sounds like the mechanism is a development agreement outside of the zoning rules.
Yeah, so we've been talking about a couple different things between the institution and the city for the last, I would say, 6 months or so. Both, the conclusion of the agreement that was negotiated back in 2009, as well as the potential for zoning changes on Trinity campus. So right now, the discussion is primarily focused on this zoning question and not about an extension or a new housing agreement outside of the zoning.
Okay. Emily, you all set?
Sure.
So we have Michael and then Alex. Michael?
Yeah, this is on a similar theme. Megan, I wondered if in that, it strikes me that there's just a lot of parallels between the institutional parking management plan and housing housing issues spilling over from the university. And I wondered if in that late aughts process, that had been something that was discussed. Yeah, I guess a follow-up comment, but that's my first comment.
Yeah,
Question.
that's an excellent question, Michael. And I've been thinking about that a lot as well. So I stopped short of going on longer because I wanted to get some initial reactions, but if you all are okay with it, I will share the last piece, which is actually very related to what Michael was just asking. So we do get a number of details from the institutions through the joint institutional parking management plan process that at least looks out, 5 years or so at plan development, planned changes in enrollment and employment, and then specifically from a transportation and parking management lens, how to manage that growth. And so one of the things that we have been thinking about is, just based on this continued interest in overall growth plans for the institutions and how each of these individual kind of overlay zones fits within them, as well as how each individual project or development might fit within them. We have kind of been thinking about whether there's a role for a sort of campus master plan process that is a complement to the joint institutional parking management plan process that helps just fill in and connect a couple different pieces of our ordinance to one another and gives us a slightly more holistic view about the plan development activities within parts of campus that the institutions are planning. And so, that is an idea that we're starting to kind of develop, and would be interested in hearing the commission's feedback on that. Former Councilor Busher said something similar in her comments about, kind of understanding what's the plan for an entire portion of campus and how that zoning question fits into that process. And so that is something that we are starting to think about as well.
Yeah, I guess just to end my comment there, I think that the supply and demand aspect of it, including the projected, I guess, demographic cliff for the Northeast, is more important than the exact master plan, which can change based upon financing conditions and a number of other things, that donations, fundraising, et cetera. So I think that piece is extremely important. If there was a way to incorporate that, just the same models, the institutional parking plan, that would sure make a lot of sense.
Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, Lisa and Joe, thank you for coming. I am less concerned with the details of the requested changes to zoning. I think those are important, but the bigger picture here is, look, I am appreciative of the university and undergraduate students. I am a staff person at the university and a graduate, and it's that the university needs to do more to respond to and recognize the economic and pressures. Burlington just went through a reappraisal process where a lot of homeowners got enormous hikes in their property tax assessments. So the idea that UVM doesn't do enough, historically, it seems to me that the university is just not a very good partner in the city of Burlington. And that's what I think the university could do a better job at responding to. So, historically, not sharing a lot of details about future plans for development, those kinds of things just don't play well with the citizens. So, that I understand that universities need to grow and change. And so, I think the plans for Trinity are pretty good, and by all means, everybody loves graduate students. They're older, they're quieter, they don't light off bottle rockets every single night of the year. And just, how do you respond to those concerns that, the university is seeking to acquire more undergraduates and house them,
Lisa or Joe, do you have a response for Alex?
Yeah, this is Joe. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I was just muted. There's a lot of background noise here. Sorry. I guess I would say, Alex, I appreciate what you're saying about reappraisal and those kinds of pressures. I know there's a lot of pressure on housing in Burlington and in Vermont and really nationwide, unfortunately. I think that what Megan is talking about or touched on at the end here is really a notion of, being able to share information in a way that is helpful to neighbors in terms of understanding, perhaps, what the plans are going forward in some of these things. So whether it's, where, we could build and how much and that kind of thing. But also, enrollment and those kinds of anticipated changes. So I know we haven't gotten into the details too much about this, but I think that this would be a way to get at some of those ways to share information. Megan, does that cover kind of what you were thinking about? I know we haven't even really started talking about this in detail much with the city, to be honest. It's pretty new. So I don't know if that's accurate. Does that sound right to you?
Yeah, I definitely think that the intent here with thinking about a master plan requirement could help provide the community with some advance notice about future development activities that the institutions are planning to engage in, at least kind of within sub areas of the campus. I think, to Michael's point, would help to connect some of the dots about how a project or a sub portion of the campus relates to the broader issue of those enrollment trends and expectations, overall changes in beds, as well as non-residential space on the campus. Really how each of these pieces kind of fits into a more holistic vision of where the campus is going. But also, I think it also could, and some communities use these kinds of campus master plan processes as ways to address development constraints. So again, similar to what Sharon was saying, rather than kind of setting just a zoning table, if you will, at the outset, sometimes these campus master plans can help actually become the guiding development regulations for an area of campus, and that those regulations are set kind of through the creation of a master plan process. So there's lots of different things that could be achieved through this, but I think at least just thinking about kind of how do we understand where future developments could be located within at least the Trinity campus in this context, as well as, really what is the kind of anticipated capacity of that development in terms of the overall growth and enrollment of the institutions.
If I could just add a little bit as well to that, Sharon mentioned in her comments that in 2009, when we went through the rezoning process, that the university was sharing a lot of what we wanted to do. And I believe, what we were sharing at the time was our campus master plan, which was done in 2006. It's not a traditional, you think of a master plan from a private developer that may have one piece of land that they're working on for 10 years, and you see every building laid out in an exact footprint, and that is approved and then developed, because we're really planning for the long term. We've been here for a long time. We plan to stay for a long time. Ours shows more what we call land banks, which are sites that are appropriate for development or appropriate for being set aside as green space. And many of them are put into categories of what's appropriate to go in that area, whether it's residential or academic or administrative. We haven't updated that plan since 2006. It's served us very well over that long term, but it probably does feel a little bit like we're not sharing it because we haven't, because we did it so long ago, and it has served us well. We're actually in the process of updating it now. And it is an update to what we had, based on what we've developed over the past, 15 plus years. And so, I think that probably taking that and being able to show you, where we're thinking about for land banks and what we're thinking about, and putting that together with some of the JIP information might be able to provide you with some of the clarity that you're looking for.
That sounds good. Michael?
Yeah, I mean, I think that master plan is helpful, but I think if anything, if we've learned anything in higher education in the world generally over the last 3 years, is that the institution as kind of a staid body that has, is going to do this, this, and this over the next couple decades is just not the way things are going to work, at least for the next decade, as the ripple effects of what has happened occur. So I think a real-time analysis of where supply and demand stands, of beds available versus students there, that is somehow regularly presented to some body, be it the Planning Commission or otherwise, is a really potentially helpful tool, and would also allow us to, in a parallel track, think about the actual nuts and bolts of this proposal and get something built to start relieving some of the pressure around town. So that would really be my perspective on this, because a master plan in this day and age, other than the number of bodies you're going to have on campus, I don't think means a whole lot.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think one of the things that the JIP does do within the context, again, of parking is try to at least provide context for developments that the institutions are planning within a 5-year horizon, and what the potential net of beds and non-residential area might be, as well as the potential net in terms of students and employees. And so I think that there are definitely opportunities for us to, and again, I mentioned earlier some of the clarifications that we're making as part of that parking amendment process, but I agree, I think that there could be a better way to connect the dots between these institutional campus overlays and both what we require from a planning perspective as part of the JIP process, as well as the information sharing that comes from that process that could just help bridge a couple gaps that exist between these concepts. So yeah, it's possible that a kind of campus master plan concept is less about the physical development and more about kind of the anticipated capacity and how it's meeting that demand, right?
Let me just chime in for a little bit here as well. There have been a lot of comments, we've had a lot of discussions, we've heard a lot about all this. And from my own take is that as you move further and further away, step back further away from Colchester Ave, there's a lot more flexibility, I think, that there could be, higher buildings. I don't know that we have to be wedded to the existing density requirements that there are. I think there could be a lot of flexibility on that. It's a large parcel, and as you're away from the main street, from Colchester Ave, it has much less of an impact. One of the things that we've heard, from Sharon, and I think from others, and I suspect as this continues to move forward, that we'll hear more about this. So as you get closer to Colchester Avenue, there's a bigger concern about the height, to make sure that it fits in with the neighborhood, within the community that's around there, provide some of that breathing space. And so, as I would say, as we continue to move forward with this, to pay particular attention to the impact along Colchester Ave, whether it needs to have a larger setback than what we've been talking about, whether it needs to be like closer to Colchester Avenue, building heights that are more in line of what's in the neighborhood around there. And I think these are all things that should be explored a little bit more. But again, as you move back, I think there's a lot of flexibility that can happen, and really no need to have the housing density that there is right now. When we look at some of the uses, the permitted uses and conditional uses, are there single detached dwelling units in this overlay?
I don't believe so, but Lisa, I don't know if do you have any single detached dwellings in the overlay?
Not within the overlay.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so in the permitted uses, I'm not sure why we would allow that there. It just doesn't seem like I mean, that seems almost complete opposite of what we're trying to accomplish, what UVM wants to accomplish, and what we really want in that area. I think someone had mentioned about dining halls, and I don't see dining halls as, unless I'm missing it, either conditional or a permitted use there. And to me, a dining hall seems like it should be a permitted use there. There's going to be, obviously a lot of housing there, hopefully.
Yeah, it probably wasn't specifically called out, kind of like if you remember our discussion about BHS, that there are certain functions that are just kind of assumed to be part of a residence hall. So
Okay,
dining hall probably wasn't called out on its own.
if that's the case, we just want to make clear that as part of a dormitory, you could have a dining hall. And maybe it is, maybe in the, I didn't look at the definition of a dormitory, but we just want to make sure that that's the case.
I think you should have a minimum number of coffee shops,
Exactly.
like 3.
And what would, oh, I was going to say, what would that number be?
You start at 3.
So, I guess just look at some of the things like that with the permitted uses and conditional use. So overall, I think it's a pretty decent list, but again, I don't know that we want single detached dwellings, even duplexes in this area. I think what we're really looking for is a higher density. And I think, as we go into the higher density, and we really do want to have it help relieve the pressure in other parts of the city. And, really do, whether it's through the zoning or it might have to be in separate discussions with the city council, get those kind of commitments to the extent that we can to, to really help relieve the pressure in the other parts of the city. That there's a trade-off here. I think, again, as you step back from Colchester Ave, there's a great opportunity for a lot more housing and a lot more integration with the neighborhood around there. But we want to make sure that's what would happen if we're doing this. So those are some of my thoughts.
Andy, could I ask just a couple follow-on questions to some of
Yeah.
your comments? Just thinking about how we kind of move this forward. You mentioned you were looking at the current amendment and what's allowed either as a permitted or conditional use. What's your feeling about that question from before about, should we be limiting these permitted uses to just existing buildings, or is it okay to allow these things as part of new construction?
Oh, let's open up that to the rest of the commission, but I would say, why limit it to the existing buildings? We're trying to create something new here, integrate the old with new, but why limit it to just old versus new? But that's my thoughts. Where are the commissioners on this?
They're talking about building new buildings. And so, I mean, I don't know, it doesn't seem to apply. I mean, what's the youngest building on that campus? It's probably 1955,
On the Trinity campus?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I think it's the 60s. I think the Macaulay and Mercy were built in the 60s.
It's true. The international style.
Yep.
Yeah, if you read the 7 Days article today, I was going to say, I think it mentioned that those were built in the 60s. Okay, so that.
Michael,
Yeah, I mean, since we're talking about form a little bit, I did just want to sort of add a few thoughts. Having gone back and forth from Burlington to Winooski for 4 years down Colchester Ave, I think that I hear Andy's point and agree with it about stepping back from Colchester Ave, but I think that it feels a little bit barren there, being sensitive to Sharon's points, and sort of being able to anchor yourself in some way would be nice. So I don't actually have a problem with the setback, so long as it's the height limits that are discussed are fine. But I guess I would just add that we have a housing need. Everyone sort of wants UVM to build more housing. And so at some portion of the campus is going to have to look pretty urban for that to happen. And I don't know that this is the right place, but that at some point you're going to have a very urban looking part of campus to facilitate the housing that's needed. And so included with that are 25-foot setback is actually pretty big for most of the city, although the height may be more. The other thing I would just say is that I think in keeping with the scale that is appropriate, stepping back and having exclusively large buildings, the sort of like towers in the park thing. I don't know that is necessarily, consistent with the city either. So I would just sort of add those as, I guess, soft counterpoints to some of the prior discussion.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Michael. If you don't mind, I was actually going to just reshare my screen here really quick and actually ask for some feedback about this point. So I just pulled up these images again that are from UVM's presentation to you back in February. So on the left, this kind of shows their thinking about potential locations for new buildings. But on the right, these images show just kind of a very simple illustration of what buildings that are 45 feet set back from 25 feet from the street could look like if you were approaching the campus from Colchester Avenue from the east. So the top image looks more directly into the campus and kind of gives a perspective, especially as you move further away from Colchester Avenue, of what some new buildings could start to look like next to the existing buildings. And then the lower image, it's very subtle, but right here is an illustration of a potential newer building that would be kind of under that requested 45-foot height limit. I think that this building right here, this home across the street, is at about 30 feet in height. So that gives you some context for what you're looking at here. So along the lines of what Michael just shared, I would be interested in hearing perspectives from other commissioners about that issue of, how far from the street is really acceptable. Are you comfortable with this concept of 45 feet closer to the street? Are there any other questions about what we could provide as information to help you consider that scale and setback?
Anyone have thoughts on this or comments to this? Thanks for that question, Megan.
Emily?
I don't think, from the images that they're showing, I don't see the 45-foot with a 25-foot setback being imposing on that street. It's a major thoroughfare into Burlington. It's one of the main routes into Burlington. And I think the other places that we've seen that were, we've encouraged heightened density on that street, those streets. And I think if we push back with a further setback, I wonder if it's actually going to crowd out some of the neighborhoods that are adjacent to the project, because it's just going to push the density further back into that lot and be closer to some of the houses that are actually in the street. I think if you look at the development pattern that we've been trying to encourage, it's like density on a major street, and then maybe as you go into a neighborhood, it gets less dense. So I don't think it looks bad to have that. And I think 25 feet is actually a very generous setback.
Anyone else?
I think the simulation photos look fine. I just wonder that it looks bigger than 25 feet in the simulation.
Yeah, can I just note that the city's property line, I believe, about 15 feet beyond the sidewalk. So it actually, if you think about, if you're measuring from the sidewalk, it's 25 feet plus 15. And Sharon brought up in her letter, and I think maybe in her comments earlier as well, the Redstone, they were Redstone Apartments, now they're Redstone Commons on South Prospect Street. And that seemed a more reasonable setback. I don't have an official measurement. I just did kind of a quick Google measurement. It looks like those are about 40 feet from the sidewalk, which I think would be about the same here. I don't have
So
measurement, but
That's helpful.
Sorry, a quick follow-on comment. I did the same thing, and also I looked at Middlebury on Route 125 and Forest Hall. That's also 45 feet. So there's like interesting consistency.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that really depends on when we say a 25-foot setback, what that really means. Is a 25-foot setback really a 40-foot setback? Because that's something that's very different.
Yeah, I appreciate that clarification, Lisa, about where the property line is. Thanks for adding that. Some of the other parts of campus where we have overlays, they establish buffers from the center line of the road. And this is a different example where we actually establish that setback from the front property line, which is actually behind the sidewalk quite a bit. So.
Megan, you had some other questions that you had of us. Do you want to just go through those one at a time?
Sure. So, I think that it's helpful to hear your reactions to this height and setback issue. The other piece was lot coverage. I know, Andy, you specifically said that you don't really have an issue with the lot coverage. That was the kind of like third request that came from UVM. So I'll pause there and see if anybody else has reactions to height, setback, or lot coverage that hasn't already been said.
Michael?
Yeah, I guess the only, the public comment that Sharon made, I did empathize with. One point was just the building that's shown, which may or may not be the final building that's built, has, it distinguishes the facade a little bit. So there's like parts that go in, parts that are, it's a large building in aggregate, but the facade is broken up so that you have some additional setbacks there. And I think that's a decent idea if you have an institutional building that is going to be of, a very large mass.
Okay. Apologies if you can hear me furiously typing. I'm trying to take notes about this discussion. Okay, so then the other questions here were about whether we should maintain the density limit. I think Andy and Michael both spoke to the idea that they would be supportive of, or maybe I'm projecting that on Michael. I know I heard Andy say it, but I don't know if anybody else. 20 units per acre doesn't mean a whole lot to just say that number out loud, but I think the point here is, in the effort to help facilitate campuses really accommodating as much of their growth within their campus boundaries as possible, do we want to be limiting them by density, or should we care more about kind of the form of buildings, their height and their mass instead?
To me, it's the form of mass density on a large campus like this doesn't have much meaning, but where are other people?
I agree with Andy.
Emily?
I had a really active role in the Eagles Landing project and followed it through the process. And I think what I learned from that was that the architecture really matters and the quality of the materials really matters. And I think we can get caught up in the form of something and all these like gimmicks around changing the material to break up the massing, or putting in different windows to make it look like multiple buildings, which I find is just a cheap way of trying to do what's difficult and may cost more, which is actually having a well-designed building. So there are some nuances to that are just hard to regulate, even in the form-based code. So I'd like to see these buildings be really high quality buildings, because hopefully they're going to be around for over 100 years because they're going to be so nice, instead of building buildings, which we see now that seem like they're really built for 30 years.
We already talked about the permitted versus conditional use relative to existing buildings. And then the last question that I had posed was about the thresholds for major impact. So as a reminder, major impact this is different than conditional use review. This is really intended to help look at the impact on services, street networks, really the capacity of the community to accept new development that's of a large scale. Within the base institutional zoning district, major impact is not applicable until a building is 40,000 square feet. But in the Trinity campus overlay, it's 15,000 square feet. So I guess there was a question about, whether commissioners feel like there should be a lower threshold for Trinity campus, or if it should just be consistent with the underlying institutional zone.
Michael?
Does the major impact get into things like, well, I guess it would be a different story, but things like just infrastructure capacity?
Yep.
Or is,
Sorry, yes, major impact gets into things like infrastructure capacity.
And school capacity and things like that. I mean, if I might, my sense is we had the same discussion like for the downtowns a few years back, where we want, good, healthy development in the downtown. And it used to be as soon as somebody would come to us and say, okay, we'll develop in your downtown, we would tell them, okay, now prove to us we could handle it, And that just seemed to me to be, the opposite of what we're trying to accomplish. And it almost feels like the same thing here. We want Trinity campus. We want there to be development there. We wanted to relieve some of the pressure. And it seems like on the one hand, with the major impact, on the one hand, we're saying, put more dorms here, put more development here. And then as soon as they come to us and say, we'll do it, we say, okay, prove to us it's okay for you to do that. It just seems like we're requiring them to prove to us something that we want them to do is okay. And I think a lot of that really is on the city to do. If we want them to build it there, we need to make sure that the water system could accommodate it. We need to make sure the electric system could accommodate it. We need to make sure the roads can accommodate it. So I'm less concerned about major impact in areas like this where we want there to be major development.
So
Alex?
can I just make one response to that, Andy? I think I just want to be clear, like from a staff perspective, I don't necessarily think it's a good idea to lift any major impact review. I think, and going back to the idea of a campus master plan in whatever iteration it could look like, that process could kind of function as what you were just describing, Andy, that it could give us some more upfront opportunity to understand potential impact, not just from one single development, but from maybe multiple developments in a campus area on our city systems to understand if there will be substantial impacts, but wasn't necessarily thinking that they would be lifted altogether, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be lifted altogether, but maybe just raised, the threshold raised for it is what I was thinking. But before I get to you, Michael, Alex, did you raise your hand?
I did. So, I tend to agree with you, Andy, and it's kind of of two minds about this project, because I think we want to encourage, development of Trinity campus. The question is the major impact on the community of the university. And I've said all this before, but that you have this one actor that has this outsized influence on housing prices and rental properties in the city of Burlington. And so we don't have a city attorney here tonight, but Megan, do you have any idea of what is our ability to condition approval of a zoning change on a real commitment by the university to, do something about the wild imbalance of rental housing prices in the city? You're muted.
Did you read my lips?
That was awesome.
Alex is like, this is what I thought you said. This is what I want to hear you say. No, I was saying it's a good question, Alex. And I did, just to clarify, you said to condition a zoning change or a permit. What was your?
A zoning change, because that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah. I mean, so I mentioned this before, that in some of the work that was done in 2009, there was an effort to try to condition some of the zoning changes on some sort of benchmark about housing a certain number of students on campus. And ultimately that didn't get adopted. I haven't been able to do the full research on why that didn't happen. I did see some references to a question about whether that was legal. But, this question has come up in a lot of other contexts as well about, the joint institutional parking management plan process. It sets certain benchmarks for how to manage transportation impacts. And I come back to, again, this idea of the potential for a campus master planning effort to help us just kind of understand what some of the future goals, impacts, benchmarks could be as part of that process. Ultimately, we weren't successful in tying a zoning change to that kind of work before through zoning in the past. And that was what really kind of led to some of the work that we did outside of zoning to have agreements outside of zoning. So it's not a legal advice kind of answer, but it's what I know for.
So what, this is a problem for the city council and the mayor? Not for us? I mean, or it's something that will be ultimately decided by them or not?
I would say ultimately, like setting a kind of agreement about a certain percentage of housing on campus or students on campus has historically been handled through agreements outside of the zoning ordinance. So yes.
Thank you.
Michael?
Well, I was just going to say it was in response to the sort of the lessening or the waiving of the major impact review, but I think it should be replaced by this institutional housing management plan that would give us a sense of 5-year projections on students, and we'd use it the same. It would give us the same leverage that we use with parking, which we've decided is a externality, and so is housing. It wouldn't be a development agreement because it's not on city land, but it would speak to the overflow impacts of the development itself.
I like that idea.
Anyone else? Megan, any other questions for us?
No, I think that those were the questions that I had thrown at you in rapid fire at the beginning. So
I think we're winding down on our discussion tonight. Anything else you need from us, or where do we go from here? What's the next steps in this?
yep. So at your very next meeting, you actually have several public hearings on items that you've been working on recently. So our anticipation is that we will continue the discussion with you on this at your meeting in late June, that we could come back to you with some more refined ideas based on tonight's discussion about what the zoning amendment could look like. In the meantime, we do also plan to work with UVM to have some opportunities for some community discussion about some of these same questions as well. So we're working with them also in mid to late June to set up an opportunity to share some of these concepts and to collect some feedback on them, so that we can share that with you the next time it comes to you as well. So that would be where we'll go from here tonight.
Any closing comments or questions before we close out this item? All right, I don't see any, so we'll close this out. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Lisa, for coming and joining us tonight. And thanks for Sharon and Barbara for your comments as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny.
We'll move on to item 6.5, which is the recommendation regarding the appointment, reappointment by the mayor of our director of planning. We spoke about this at our executive session at the last meeting, and we wanted to put this on the record. Michael.
Yeah, I had something that wasn't necessarily relevant other than just our praise for Megan at the last meeting, but I would just also like to draw attention to the fact that we have a planning director that has experience in another college town of State College and how valuable that is in conversations like this.
Absolutely. So as we discussed last time around, the Planning Commission has been asked for its input on whether Megan should be reappointed, and any public comments or a motion along those lines of what our recommendation is. And out of the executive session, there was a resounding yes, she should be reappointed. A motion would be good.
I make a motion to reappoint Megan as the planning director.
So
with
it's
accompanying reports.
Yeah, it would be a recommendation to the mayor's office. And
Make a
to the city council.
recommendation, a motion to make a recommendation to the mayor's office to reappoint Megan as the planning director.
Good.
Resounding second.
Good, we have a motion and a second. Thank you for that. And the comments that we got during the executive session, as Alex just said, was a resounding recommendation for reappointment. Any other comments before we go to the vote on this?
Could I make a quick comment, Andy?
Sure.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank Emily for remembering to send along the statutory reports. That's very important. part of it.
Never forget, I was there for the beginning of that.
Just want to say thanks very much to all of you for your support and your collaboration. I know that we've been working through some really difficult issues, and I appreciate continuing to have a really good working relationship with all of you as we work through these things and as I get my footing and make this transition. So as I said before, it's hard to believe it's already been 6 months, but I look forward to many more. So.
Good. We join that, looking forward. With that, all in favor of the motion, say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? Great. So we'll forward this on to the mayor's office.
All right, thank you.
We are at almost 8:20. Megan, how long is that presentation, or should we hold off to another meeting?
Yeah, I don't have to do it tonight unless anybody's burning to hear. I could give more of just a summary about how my budget presentation went, if you'd like. Unless there's
I have
any-
I have a hard stop at 8:30, so if there's any action items that need a vote, because I think I'm the quorum.
Okay, actually, we have a quorum even without you. We
Okay.
have.
All right, well then,
But I
Wait, yeah,
think,
Andy, I can hold off.
okay,
It's not urgent.
okay,
And I'm happy to actually share. I can just send you all my slides that I gave to the Board of Finance last week, so you can take a look at them. And then we can talk about them in a future meeting as well.
okay, that'd be great. So we'll skip that item and move on to item 7, which is commissioner items. Our next meeting is on 14th at 6:30, and I think that's where we're going to have a lot of our public hearings.
Yes, that'll be it'll be entirely devoted to public hearings.
Any other commissioner items?
No, but thank you to Bryn.
Yeah, definitely.
Fran.
When's your last meeting with us? Is this it, or are there more?
I'm gonna be able to keep coming through June, and then in
Perfect.
July I won't be able to attend anymore.
Okay, good. At least we get you for another couple.
Yeah.
Good. So item 8 is minutes and communications. Is there a motion to approve the minutes and accept the communications? Yes,
Actually,
Michael.
yeah, I wanted to make an adjustment or add
Oh,
something that I
sure.
thought was missed in the minutes. In our discussion of the temporary shelters, there was a discussion both from, I think, multiple commissioners about the length of time that is being defined as permanent. There was the staff response to that was noted in the minutes, but I did want to highlight that commissioners has raised that issue. And also that the comments were kind of anonymous from the commissioners, but it came from me, that wanted policy to generally focus on permanent supportive housing rather than temporary housing.
Are there changes to the minutes that you'd want to see from this?
Those two comments added.
Okay,
Okay, we can do that. And yeah, happy to, if you would like that latter point to be specifically attributed to you. We don't usually do like a kind of verbatim of who said what, but we can add that if you would like it to be.
Yes, please.
Okay.
with those changes to the minutes, do we have a motion to approve the minutes and accept the communications?
I moved.
Motion by Alex.
Yes.
Is there a second? Seconded by Michael. Any more discussion, any other changes? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye or raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed? That's unanimous. Then we're on to item 9, which is adjournment. Motion to adjourn by Emily, seconded by Bryn. All those in favor of adjournment, say aye.
aye.
We stand adjourned. We got you done, Emily.
Thank you all.
Kind of, thanks for,
Thanks. Thanks all.
okay.
Thank you all.
See you next time. Take
Great
care.
evening.
Have a good night, everyone.
Too.